Hello. Hello and welcome to the Agroforestry in Action webinar series. Today's presentation is entitled Agroforestry and Forestry in Sulawesi, Linking Knowledge with Action. Our speaker today is Dr. James Roshetko of the World Agroforestry Center. The Agroforestry in Action series is a production of the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri. I'm your host, Gregory Ormsby-Mori, the Education and Outreach Coordinator with the Center for Agroforestry. Thanks for joining us today for this presentation. Again, our speaker is Dr. James Roshetko. Dr. Roshetko is the leader of the Trees Agroforestry Management and Marketing Unit and an agroforestry systems scientist with the World Agroforestry Center, also known as ECRAF. Jim's research focus is on smallholder tree farming systems for livelihood enhancement, carbon storage, and sustainable environmental management. He has many years of experience working in agroforestry and natural resource management, especially in Southeast Asia. I think over 20 years in Indonesia. Dr. Roshetko leads the agroforestry tree domestication and marketing work, as I mentioned, for the Center's Southeast Asia program in the Bogor office. He participates in a number of the Center's global research interests, including agroforestry, germplasm supply systems, smallholder timber production systems, smallholder marketing, and agroforestry extension. Dr. Roshetko did his doctoral work, his dissertation at the University of Copenhagen, and focused on smallholder agroforestry systems and their potential for enhancing livelihoods and carbon storage. So that's Dr. Roshetko's background and research interest. Let's welcome Dr. Roshetko for this presentation, again entitled Agroforestry and Forestry in Sulawesi, Linking Knowledge with Action. Jim?
All right, thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. And hello to everyone, or good morning for you guys. I guess it's good evening for me. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to give the presentation on the Agroforestry and Forestry in Sulawesi project, which we called AgFor. So let me control this here. All right, good. So just as a quick outline, I just want to go over, a quick few points about what Sulawesi was like at the beginning of the project, the design of the project, as well as the approaches and focuses that we used. A little bit on the baseline study results, some of the technical approaches and focuses that we had, something about the exit strategy we used, and then hopefully have a very productive discussion with everyone. So this was a big project. It had three main components, and it was it was planned for a 5-year period, but then stretched to 6 years. So I'm not going to go systematically through everything because that would take a very long time. So I'm going to jump around a bit, focus on the things that I found interesting and that I think other people will find interesting. Okay. So Sulawesi, when we started the project, it had gone through a period of agrarian change over the last 20 years. It had gone from shifting in subsistence agriculture much more towards market orientation. It went through something called the chocolate revolution, where a lot of previously poor farmers were making good money on growing cacao. Then there was a huge influx of migrants, which resulted in the marginalization of some of the indigenous groups. Sulawesi is also quite unique because of its biodiversity. There's a lot of valuable indigenous tree species that we could consider undomesticated. And there's a lot of environmental threats, mainly because of that shift towards a market orientation. So if we look, there was a lot of change, as I said, in the years before the project began. So we saw a big decrease in the area of forest, even a decrease in the area of agroforest, but increase in plantation and agricultural crops. So what we identified as the development challenges at the beginning of the project was that there was actually a low diversity in the rural economy. A lot of people were growing cacao or chocolate very heavily into that, and as the soils began to deteriorate and prices started to decrease, They wanted to diversify, but they didn't really know what to do. And that also, led to vulnerability in environmental and climate change. There's also limited land tenure security and weak local governance overall. So there was limited in the technology and knowledge of the smallholder farmers, sort of a lack of understanding about what governance was and spatial planning and sustainable management and even access to markets in general. So those were the things we wanted to focus on. So we, with the support of the, what at the time was the Canadian International Development Agency, but is now called Global Affairs Canada, we developed the Agroforestry and Forestry in Sulawesi project, specifically linking knowledge with action. So we wanted to help the farmers to develop, new approaches, new management to manage their livelihoods, but also increase their governance and sustainable management of the environment. It was designed to be for 5 years, from 2011 to 2016, but we did get an extension for an extra year. It was located in South Sulawesi. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Okay, on South Sulawesi, Southeast Sulawesi, and Gorontalo. So you can see the 3 red circles there, with a total of 10 districts. Okay, key partners besides the World Agroforestry Center, or ICRAF, was also Winrock International, which is a U.S. based NGO in Arkansas, actually. C4, OWT, which is an Indonesian NGO, conservation oriented. UNHAS, which is the university in Makassar. Bapanas, which is the National Development Agency. So those are the key partners. There's also the local governments, as well as local NGOs, local community groups who were involved. So there was an overall ultimate outcome or goal for the project. It was to increase the equitable and sustainable forestry and agroforestry based incomes for the poor men and women of Sulawesi. And under that, we had 3 objectives or intermediate outcomes in the words of CETA. So one was focused on livelihoods, as though improving livelihoods for smallholder farmers through sustainable and gender equitable agroforestry and forestry. Governance, basically increasing the involvement of men and women in participatory governance for land use and natural resource management. And basically sustainable environmental management. So looking at integrated management across the landscape rather than at the field level or the individual landholding level. So for each of those components, we had 3 steps: a diagnostic step, capacity building steps, and as well as a step to develop enterprises, schemes, or strategies, as you can see on the screen there. And then that was sequential, but at the same time it was quite often parallel. And you can see the arrows that we felt that everything was very well connected. And we had a pretty strong communication program to help, bring in input from other people, as well as share the results of the project, both at the local level, at the national level, and through publications at a larger level as well, or broader level. So we felt that this was one of the important successful approaches to the project, that we started in 2 districts in 2 provinces to begin with. So even though we were focused for 3 provinces, we started at 2. And then after halfway through the project, so after 2.5 years, we expanded to the 3rd province, as well as added 2 districts in each of the original 2 provinces. So overall 10 provinces. In each of those districts, we would focus on 6 villages, and in each village we had at least 1 farmer group, and we had a program called basically spontaneous groups, or spontaneous farmers. So anyone who was interested in what the project was doing, we would encourage them to get involved, and as much as we could, we would help them. So we would actually go out and seek that. So, then that was a target for 6 more villages per district, but we actually had a lot more. To pick which districts that we wanted to start with, we just focused on, who was interested and where we could start fast, where were agroforestry systems an important part of the livelihoods, what were the commodities and associated tree crops. Also, we made sure that there were opportunities for participatory governance, social forestry programs, that the governments were interested in helping the local communities gain access to land that was actually officially government land, but the communities could manage. Okay. The beneficiaries we focused on were farmers, individual farmers and farmers groups that were committed to enhancing their livelihoods and participating in governance and environmental programs. We had a special focus for women in disadvantaged groups. This is a strong part of the Canadian approach. Now they have something called the Feminist International Assistance Policy, which means that everything that they do under development assistance should have a very strong gender equitable approach. And we found that to be very, very successful under Ag4. A lot of times we would enter the communities and tell them that tell the community that we wanted to have a very gender equitable approach, and we would justify that by saying that the women and men each have unique knowledge, and that if we move forward without any one of them, that we're working with only half the information that's available. Another thing that we did, we had this first ready, first served approach. So as soon as a community was ready, we would start working with them. That way, it actually really facilitated quicker advance and quicker achievement in the project. So at the district level, we had, or at the province level, we would have project teams on the ground. We would have a coordinator, agroforestry specialist, farmer specialist, marketing facilitator, governor facilitator, environmental facilitator, and so on. So all these people were working full-time in the project in the village. And then they would be backed up with technical support from Bogor and other locations with those various skills that are listed there. The organizational chart, what I just wanted to mention about this is that we had a project advisory committee. And that was CETA, which the Canadian government, FORTA, which is the Forestry Research Agency, BAPANAS, again, which is the National Development Agency, and the local NGOs. So those people helped advise the project. They would review the project activities, give advice on how we could enhance impact, and also channel outputs, channel information and results from the project to other people. And that worked quite well for about the first half of the project. And then once the project started rolling very effectively, the PAC became less important. And those people are all very busy, so they agreed that the PAC would stop operating after 3 years. And then quickly, just that the project aimed to focus on the priorities of not just CETA, CETA at the international level and CETA's Indonesian office, but also the government of Indonesia. So with the government of Indonesia, a lot of things were sustainable integrated natural resource management, conservation of biodiversity, revitalization of forest industries. In this case, it's very locally based, or we might say smallholder based. The community forestry program or social forestry program, empowerment of the people. Those were all things that were very important to the Indonesian government at the beginning of the project, and we strongly focused on that. And even though that this was a development project, we also had a good research focus on the project. We developed the concept of research in development, so that in the development project we could also do research. And you can see the bullet list of what the priorities were in the various components. Again, gender awareness and inclusion was a big part of it. And I think the rest of the bullets I don't really need to read. So then maybe shifting gears a little bit, this is more towards the baseline study. So these are land holdings and land use systems, and this is for South Sulawesi. South Sulawesi we can sort of think about as an area that the landscape is already very full. You know, the average land holding is only 1 to 2 hectares. The key systems there are coffee agroforestry, mixed gardens, cacao agroforestry, and maize. And let me jump to the next. And then in southeast Sulawesi, it's much more of a frontier, right? There's a lot more land. People own from 2.5 to almost 5 hectares of land. So this is, you know, the landscape is much more natural. There's a lot of fallowed land. There's a lot of opportunities, and this is where people people continue to flow in to southeast Sulawesi, and often just from South Sulawesi, which is not too far away. And here, you know, the key land use systems is pepper agroforestry, mixed gardens, and cacao. Again, it's a lot of times, even though these mixed systems have a lot of different species in them, there's 1 or 2 key commodities which provide most of the income for the family. Then if we look at what the income sources are, here, this again is South Sulawesi. So cacao agroforestry, coffee agroforestry, and mixed garden systems. Then if we look at southeast Sulawesi, again, it's cacao and pepper. So the commodity systems, commodity-based systems, are very important. And then this is also quite interesting. So what we found is that again, and this is from the baseline, that the mixed systems actually provide better income than the monocultural systems, with the exception of clove and pepper, because of the very large demand for those. Okay, now shifting gears once again more towards what did we do and you know, how we moved forward. So again, a lot of the farmers are very interested in improving their farming systems, improving their, you know, their production systems, but by and large, they're not really sure where to put their energies. So based on a lot of our activities in other sites, you know, we see that it's these 5 key components: tenure, supportive policies, nurseries and quality germplasm, tree management skills, and market information and links that we focused on. So in this project, we certainly covered all 5 of those, and I think I'm going to probably stress a lot more about the ones in red. So the nurseries, the germplasm, tree management skills, and market information. So we very much used the nurseries as sort of an entry point. This was where we would organize the farmer groups around the concept of them building nurseries, because there were in all the areas that we worked, there were basically no nurseries. So if people wanted trees, they had to go, you know, pull them out of the forest themselves, or just hope that a government program would come along. But the government programs would only provide the species that the government programs wanted. So we developed the nurseries so that the communities could control their own species that were produced and the quality of the seedlings. And overall, people were very, very keen to develop the nurseries. So we'd go over all the basics about why a nursery, where it should be located, and in the basic management. And that would be also closely linked into the development work plan for the community. So by the end of the first training, everybody had a functioning nursery operating. Okay, and then through that we used the nursery as a basis from where we would make bi-weekly follow-up with the communities from the field-based teams. And again, they would move forward on, you know, vegetative propagation, agroforestry systems management, etc. And overall, the nurseries just served as a foundation for the research and development activities in the communities. We would, you know, to really encourage the farmers to gain better understanding and better management of their agroforestry systems, we developed a concept called the farmer demonstration trials. So these were trials where the farmers and the team would work together to, you know, prioritize or identify what were the priorities of the community and go ahead and turn, this would be two ways. If they had fallow land, we would plant it from scratch, or if they had an operating tree garden already, we would alter the management. So it worked very well as demonstrating the advantages of good quality germplasm and good management. Also inspired the farmers to innovate, as well as would become venues for training. This was a very successful approach. We also this started more or less in year 2, the farmer extension approach, is that after the first year we could identify which farmers were good farmers, but more importantly, who were good at teaching. So we would identify those people and we'd give them extra training, and the idea would be that empower the farmers to disseminate information to other farmers, because we found the farmers like to talk to us, but when they can talk to another farmer who is very knowledgeable, they learn much more. So that was the approach. Again, very successful, and it also fit in with the government program that evolved called the volunteer farmer extensionist. So some of the farmers we trained were able to actually be hired by the local government, and this was also an important step towards the project's exit strategy. Right, we wanted to leave a lot of well-trained people in place who could continue the project after it was over. Yeah, and so the farmer-to-farmer extension, very similar. So once farmers were trained, we would let them go out and do a lot of the extension. So especially after the third year, where we moved on to 3 or 6 new districts, the farmers that we had trained previously stayed behind in their own districts and acted as the project's field extensionists. Okay. Again, as I said before, we had a big focus on gender, and this is related to the to CETA or GAC's focus on feminist international assistance policies. We wanted to promote and implement a gender equitable approach in the project. We kept a lot of the data from the project was disaggregated by gender. Evaluating the gender roles within agroforestry systems, etc. So we were able to actually publish a lot of good articles on gender issues and gender roles in species selection, agroforestry management, and landscape governance as well. So we felt that was quite successful. Of course, there was also a very large focus on cacao and coffee agroforestry systems, as those are 2 very important systems in those areas. They're also very important to Indonesian farmers in general, as Indonesia is a major producer of both of those crops. We focused on, the key problems were pests and diseases. Smallholder production systems were all, decreasing. Farmers were losing interest in these systems, even though there was a huge demand. So we identified, what were the typologies of those systems, helped identify what are the best management practices for farmers with various social economic conditions. So again, a lot of these results are still actually just coming in, because we didn't really start until about the 2nd or 3rd year. But there should be some publications coming out on this. What else? So we did do a Cacao Certification we partnered actually with colleagues across other parts of the world. There's a big focus on Cacao Certification within Indonesia and other countries, and in Indonesia it just doesn't work. So we wanted to analyze why that was. Why is it that farmers don't adopt what the industry calls and what the government calls the best practices? And so we looked at that, and that study is coming out right now. in the Journal of Biodiversity Science and Ecosystem Management. So what else? Yeah, and so the marketing and enterprise, that was also a rather important focus for our project. Overall, there's very weak market awareness, information, skills, infrastructure, etc. The value chains in these communities, in rural Indonesia in general, are very inefficient. So a lot of collectors, a lot of traders, and so they each need a little bit of profit. So the whole chain is just very inefficient. So we focused on implementing rapid market assessments, value chain strengthening, capacity development, enterprise development, which basically means that helping farmers learn that they should not just be a producer, but that they should understand what the market is and pick crops and their role within the value chain to increase their overall productivity, and go out and look proactively to develop partnerships with the private sector. So this was quite successful. We were able to develop 114 agroforestry enterprises. A lot of that was focused on cacao, coffee, honey, nurseries, and organic fertilizer production. They were like about 10,000 people that were directly involved in those enterprises and improved value chains. Now shifting gear once more towards the environmental work, because of the vulnerability to climate change, vulnerability to the market, and other biodiversity stresses, what we developed was a capacity strengthening approach for vulnerability assessment. And our approach, there's a lot of this type of work that seems to go on, but our approach was very much to focus at the local level. So looking at the landscape and societal human capacity to understand where the stresses are coming and why the communities are vulnerable. And when we would start this work, the communities almost inevitably would say that they don't really know and they don't really understand the process. But by focusing on local knowledge and what farmers do to deal with these stresses, we were able to identify that the farmers do know quite a bit, and more importantly, we were able to strengthen their faith in their own management, and we were able to publish some material on this as well. Okay. Another important step was the livelihood conservation strategies. This is very strongly focused on what the government calls their social forestry program. So we wanted to make sure that the communities would be that they were benefiting for their traditional, proper conservation-oriented management. We wanted to make sure that that the management approaches used by the communities were compatible with sustainable management. We also focused on improving the role of women in that the important role of women was actually acknowledged more greatly, because as I said before, there's certain things that women do that men don't do, so it needs to be strongly acknowledged that that they're an important player. We were able to develop. We had a target of developing these livelihood conservation strategies in every district. We didn't quite make that. We made for 8 of the 10 districts, but we were able to develop some subnational regulations as well. So here's just some examples of the documents. And then actually I got a little bit mixed up. So what I was talking about before was actually as it presented on this slide. So this is where the social forestry program came in. So we had, with the government, we had community forestry, which is called a HKM, village forest, customary forest, people's parks, people forests, and community forest plantations. This program was extremely successful. We were able to, before the project started, actually, the provincial and district governments had a very adversarial role with the communities about using the forest. But we were, by being sort of an honest broker, we were able to help improve that situation quite a bit, and integrate the communities into the land use planning and participatory governance approaches. One of the sites, the customary forest systems that we were able to develop was actually praised by the president of Indonesia at a national meeting as an example that other communities and other districts and provinces should follow up. So we were able to produce 12 different policy briefs on these various social forestry programs in both, so 6 different ones, but in both English and in Indonesian. I should say that the key partner in this was also C4, and then a couple of local NGOs. All right. So this sort of coming towards a close. From the very beginning, we planned to develop these exit strategies with the communities and the local governments. So we're starting in year 3, we would meet with the government and meet with the local communities and stressing the concept of the exit strategy. And that was to ensure that the activities would continue after the project ended. The principle was with transparency, inclusion, commitment, and sustainability by all partners who were involved. Everyone, we were honest in saying that after the project closes, that the level of activity is not going to be able to be at the same level, but we want to be sure that people can continue. The focus was on agroforestry systems, forestry systems and management, the market and enterprise development, the natural resource management regulations and communications. So we work closely with the communities as well as the district level governments to do this. We would usually develop the first drafts and the structure of these exit strategies, but then they had full power to provide input overall. And this was quite successful because all 10 districts, district governments and the key communities and key stakeholders, they all agreed to these exit strategies and signed them and committed to continuing the activities after the end of the project. Just a framework of what the exit strategy. This was one of the working documents that we did to develop the exit strategy. And I think there's just two more slides left. Maybe just some list of publications and some achievements. So even though this was a development project, we worked. We had at least 23 different peer-reviewed documents that were published. A lot of that focused on vulnerability, gender, species selection under various conditions, cacao management, nursery resource propagation, teak management, a lot of baseline studies as well, conference paper, which were various subjects, the policy briefs, as I mentioned, on the social forestry issues and impact assessment, and then a lot of more farmer-oriented and NGO-oriented documents, manuals and technical guidelines that were about species management and system management, etc. Then if we think about the achievement from the development side or the development project side, the impact assessment actually showed that over 600,000 people benefited from adopting the agroforestry technologies that were promoted through the farmer groups and the farmer extensionists, and that the annual income increased from 14% in South Sulawesi to 18% in Southeast Sulawesi. In Gorontalo, we were only on the ground for 2 years, so we really couldn't measure that yet. And something that was greatly appreciated by the Canadian government was that 65% of the non-AgFor participants in the project areas actually also felt that they increased their income by adopting agroforestry technologies. And a lot of this would be, people looking over the fence to see what the project was doing and then copying it, or being able to, jump on the bandwagon to sell their crops through the improved value chains. So I won't go through the whole list, but there was also over 700,000 hectares of land were considered to be under improved management. As I mentioned before, 114 agroforestry enterprises, and something that we felt quite good about too was 20 students from from universities, mainly Indonesians, were able to go ahead and do some field research. Actually, 2 of those kids were from high schools, actually, so that was quite interesting. Yep, that's it. So thank you very much. It's hopefully that was a sort of a quick overview of the project and some of the achievements, etc. So hopefully that you found that interesting, and we can have a productive discussion. Thank you.
Jim, can you hear me?
Terima kasih means thank you, by the way.
All right. Well, terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was
I can hear you well.
Comprehensive, very interesting. And yeah, let's open up things for questions and discussion. I'll go ahead and open a question and answer pod here that participants could write. Sure, if
Greg,
you would like to address some of those to get things started. Anyone in particular that some of those participants are here?
Yeah. There was a question about how does agroforestry affect native wildlife, and I think let me try to take a stab at that. So it very much depends on what's the agroforestry system, especially the species and the design. But a lot of times especially in more remote areas or areas that are far from urban settings, I guess, is that the species and the structure of the gardens provide good food and habitat for the wildlife, right? So that's quite frequently we see that. But probably a big plus is that by having these productive agroforestry systems and increasing the productivity of the systems, that it decreases the pressure on the forest. So that is a big benefit for the wildlife. I just talked to some people from a rubber company today, and they want us to come out and take a look at how we can help improve the buffer zone of their plantation, which is next to a conservation area, to provide elephant habitat and elephant corridors, between the natural forest and other areas where the elephants are. So that's quite exciting for us. And then a question about that is agroforestry better than monocultural systems? And basically, we feel it's very true. And it mainly has to do with risk management. So smallholders, if they only have one crop and that and there's some disease problem that year, or the price of that commodity decreases, then they're in big trouble. So that's why they very frequently like to have diversified systems.
Jim, you see, there are a few questions coming in now from the participants. The first one there from Joshua Booty asks about any specific pests or disease problems, and what that may have affected some of the agroforestry systems that you work with, and some of the mitigation strategies. Oh, specifically with cacao agroforestry.
Yeah, I mean, with cacao, is the black pod. It was, is a big problem, and the boring insects. So, a lot of that has to do with making sure that your garden is clean, making sure that they collect the pods that are infected by either the black pod or the borers. and also just, cleaning the garden a lot of times. So that, and frequently farmers know that, they've been trained in that before, but because they're not getting, a real high value, they're not getting high price for their cacao, then they don't manage for those issues. So that's why we would try to promote, mixing, staying away from a monoculture and having mixed systems where those pest and disease problems would decrease.
A few more questions have come in. One question in particular is of interest to me, was one I was thinking of asking you also, Jim. And Ryan Davala asks about the selected leaders, the farmer volunteer extensionists in each district that were used to disseminate or spread knowledge to other farmers. And the question is about how these individuals were selected, and were they compensated in any way or given any incentives initially when they were at the volunteer status?
Yeah, good question. Right. So, what we would do is initially we would focus on who was the leader of the farmer group, but that wasn't always the right person. And it's not that like it was a mistake, it's a good way of starting. But after 1 year or 18 months, then you identify the people who's, like I said before, who's a good farmer, but actually is very good at, who's very patient and has the capacity to teach others. So that was the key thing. So being not the best farmer, because actually a lot of times we found that the best farmer is not a very good teacher, but a good farmer who is patient and able to teach. They were compensated for the first year and a half, I believe, and we told them from upfront that we'll pay you for the first year and a half. You can consider this a job, or you can consider it sort of an on-the-job training process. But that after a year and a half, we won't pay you anymore. But by then you should start to make connections where maybe you can work for an NGO or for the government, and that quite frequently would happen. A lot of the farmers would actually, after their salary stopped, they would continue to meet with other people in the community and teach them, because it became a sense of pride for them. They were recognized as an expert or specialist in agroforestry or in nurseries or something. So quite frequently that they would just continue the work. They would also sometimes take on extra roles, like they might be they might become a trader or collector of agroforestry products, right? So that was a way that they would increase their income. A lot of times they would, at a farmer group level, they would what's the English word? They would gather enough crops that they could get a premium for the product, right? So a whole truckload of product instead of, a couple of bags. And quite a few of those farmer specialists actually were hired by local governments or hired by NGOs, and we even took some of them to other districts to become farmer specialists in other projects.
Thank you. Moving down, Jim, do you see any other questions that you'd like to address? Either the question from Michael Cooley about the exit strategies, or from Joanna about impressions of smallholders.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good one. Specifically the exit strategies were designed, a lot of times with development projects, one of the key criticisms is that everything grinds to a halt when you stop. So we wanted to make sure that there were assets on the ground, at the farm level, that people had better, more productive systems, that they had knowledge on how to manage those systems, they had knowledge about how linking into the market, and that the local leadership was in place. So that was a key thing, and also making sure that the communities and the governments and other stakeholders, local NGOs or community organizations, they were all together and had the same vision. We were also lucky in that at this time, the district governments started to have their own budgets, and the district governments also are now elected. So they if they want to be reelected, they have to make sure that they're providing services that are beneficial to the community. And it's also nice in that, over the last 10 years, the district governments have really evolved into wanting the communities to be continue to develop and continue to do better. So it used to be just that they were sort of a manager of the district, right? But now they very much became proponents of improving local development.
Yeah. Let's try to see if we can address Joanna's question, and then I think maybe we might move on to the last two questions.
Yeah, I think that in very much, from almost every community, people wanted us to stay additionally, and they didn't want us to continue doing the same thing, but they wanted us to, move on and help them with other things. We were given a lot of the communities actually sent letters to the, excuse me, to the Canadian government that, if they could extend the project. The district governments did the same thing. And, there's a lot of testimonials about that, in the past when they would have agricultural or forestry projects, that everything just sort of stopped. But that we had given them the ability to continue to improve themselves after we were gone. But at the same time, they wanted us to stay because they knew that things could get better and better. And a lot of the communities would actually start helping neighboring communities or people in the community who were not, who had not joined the project for one reason or the other. So yeah, we felt very good about it. And during the last, during the exit workshops, a lot of the community members were crying. So it was sort of funny. It made us sad, but it made us feel good that people were that touched by the project. Thank
you, Jim. Yeah, that's well, congratulations on running an impactful project. There's just two remaining questions there from Florencia Montagnini, if you would like to try to address some of those. And in fact, we do have some time, so if we wanted to have some of Florencia or Mike Gold join in on discussion, if we can enable their mics, we could give that a try too. But Jim, do you want to try to address some of Florencia's questions?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I think that the other crops that were of high value, at one level, like cacao was the major source of income in almost every community. But is it a high value crop? Individually, maybe it's not a high value, but it's high value in that it's also the largest generator of income for families. Coffee was a very important one in that farmers had options that we helped them develop, that they could sell. They could sell green cherries, red cherries. They could sell the defleshed berries, or the defleshed beans. They could sell the roasted beans. So depending on their individual circumstances, that they had these various options that they could do. Another high value crops, of course, were cloves, pepper, nilam, which is, what's nilam in English? It's an essential oil. Patchouli, that's it. So those are a lot of the high value crops that would be the foundation of the agroforestry system, but also things like durian. If people have had the pleasure of eating durian, it's a tropical fruit that actually smells quite bad, but actually has a very creamy and rich flavor. So there were actually villages where that was their main crop, was growing durian, rambutan, mangosteen, other fruit crops like that. So moving on to the Cacao Certification, why it didn't work. A key part of that is that, a lot of the government, the industry, and even a lot of conservation organizations, they promote the certification program not so much for the benefit of the farmer, but for the benefit of themselves. So they will come up with these systems, but they don't promise a premium. So the farmers will say, actually the farmers are very grateful. It's an interesting situation. They're very grateful about that the certification programs have been started and that they learned about the certification programs, because they say that they become a better cacao farmer. They understand the market better, but for the most part, they don't want to join because there's no guaranteed premium. And by doing all the specific management that is part of a certification program, their yields actually decrease, right? The quality of the cacao improves, but there's no guarantee for quality, right? There's no price guarantee. So that's probably the key thing. And overriding that is that Sulawesi is what they call the bulk cacao area, right? So it's not intended to produce high quality chocolate for Swiss chocolate or Dutch chocolate. It goes mainly to China, North America, and South America for the less expensive sort of less expensive chocolates that are available, more widely available.
And is that
not the
because
rich
of
premium
the type
chocolates.
of cultivars that are
Okay.
selected and planted, or is it just the ability, the climate is not going to support the highest quality types, or just?
Well, they need, the international market needs a lot more bulk cacao than they do the, higher quality cacao. And so
Oh, really?
in Sulawesi also, they don't ferment the cacao, they just sell it unfermented, right? But that's what the market is. That's where the market is. So if they go ahead and ferment the chocolate, they're not guaranteed, that they're going to
Yeah, so
recoup
the whole
their
system and the
expenses
infrastructure's
for
not
fermenting.
been set up and developed to really target the high-end market. Yeah. Well, we have a few more
Exactly.
minutes here, and I don't know, Florencia, if you're still with us there. I'm going to try to enable your microphone and see if you can't join us in for a few minutes here. Florencia, your mic is enabled. I don't know if you have the capacity to respond. And also going to enable Mike Gold's mic here and see if they're able to join in any discussion. Not certain whether it's going to work, whether they have a microphone capacity on their end, but well, I can't hear you yet there, Florencia, and I'm not sure if Mike Gold is in a viewing room with other folks from the University of Missouri, and not sure if they're able to get their mic enabled. Well, give it another minute or so. If not, then oh, Mike, we can hear you now, Florencia. It's a little faint.
Yeah, could you turn up your mic?
Correct. Yeah.
One of the projects I visited when I was doing the forestry and agroforestry evaluation, which was, Agfor was embedded in that program, although Agfor started much earlier than forestry and agroforestry program started. But it was such a pleasure to visit it when we were in the field back in, when was it, like 2016 or something, and it's a pleasure to revisit the project now.
Yeah. Florencia, I'm sorry if I'm going to interrupt. If there's any way for you to get closer to your mic, because we're not really hearing you. Yeah, it might not be conducive to. Sorry, it was an impromptu.
I didn't hear anything.
A little bit better. I don't know, James. I didn't get much of.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
No,
sorry,
I can't
Florencia.
hear it all.
Yeah, we tried a little improvisation there. We just can't make out what you're saying there. All right. Well, sorry, Florencia. Thanks for joining us, and I think we're going to move on. I don't know if the viewing room with Mike Gold has any connectivity. All right. Well then, Jim, I think we did our we tried to patch them in. Thank you, terima kasih, Florencia, and I think we've addressed most of the questions there. The only maybe final thing I thought to ask you about, Jim, was you mentioned that there was initially somewhat of an adversarial relationship between, say, the local or provincial government and some of the local communities towards forage use. And can you offer any, maybe briefly, just any additional insight in how that dynamic was and then how it was transformed?
Yeah, I mean, it basically goes back to about 1998, 2000, where where elections even at the local level became the democratic approach became common throughout the country. So previously, the district governments were appointed, and it was all appointed by Jakarta. So there wasn't very much, there was little, if any, interest by the local governments to understand what people wanted. That wasn't their job. But after the elections came, then people realized that if they wanted to, if the governments wanted to be reelected again, that they needed to, provide services for the local community. And then again, of course, that then the local officials were people from the local area instead of people from other parts of the country. So that was the key thing. And then it also came out to the tax base. So if the local economy is doing better, then the local government has more money. But they actually still got money from Jakarta. Every district would get
so
a
the
certain
adversarial
amount
was
of operational funds. But once
sorry about that.
good part of it.
I'm sorry if I interrupted there. I guess the adversarial dynamic was really on the political and the structural level of how the government was formed and functioned. I was thinking that maybe it was on just certain attitudes towards use or towards any use, even if it's non-timber forest products, maybe just attitudes that they were reluctant to allow certain harvesting or uses in the forests by local communities.
Well, that's a good point. That's exactly how it was originally as well, because 70% of the country is actually what they consider the forest estate, which is under the jurisdiction of the forest department. So, even though local people have used the forest for generations and generations, the forest department's approach, and this is the forest department from Jakarta, their approach is that, you have to stay out of the forest because it's a national forest. It's for the good of the country, not, and, but, through a process of multi-stakeholder, commitment and conferences and discussions, what we generally are able to see is that what the local people want, what the local government want, what the national government wants is also, there's a lot of, there's a good Venn diagram in there. There's a lot of overlap, so that by focusing on what they have in common, opposed to the adversarial, sides of it, that everyone can make progress. I mean, we were even able to get, the government to agree that people could farm like in the national park or national forest, as long as they stopped other people, or they stopped conversion of it, what the forest was left. And a lot of times they would have to focus on perennial crops, so tree crops opposed to annual crops. But that went a long way to building trust. The local communities would increase their income, would increase their the security that they had, not to own the land but to use the land. So it was a big plus.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for that discussion, answering the questions, and for your presentation. You gave a very good overview and insight into a very interesting, dynamic project that seems to have had real impact there in Sulawesi. So I think we've come to the end of our presentation and discussion, so I would like to thank you for joining us and participating and with your presentation. Remind our participants that we hold the Agroforestry in Action webinar series approximately monthly. Our next presentation will be in March with John Fike of the Virginia Technical University on silvopasture research in Virginia. That will be up, and other webinars will be up on our schedule on the under the webinar tab on the centerforagroforestry.org website. This presentation has been recorded and will also be posted under the webinar tab on our website. So once again, thank you, Jim, and thank you to our participants, and we'll see you next time. Okay.